Hey, a warm welcome back to Heroes Behind the Badge. We tell real stories about real cops, we expose the fake news about the police, and we bring you the truth. It's Dennis Collins, it's Bill Erfurth, and it's Craig Floyd once again bringing you the very best there is to offer in the world of law enforcement. Today, we're going to do something a little different. As you know, this podcast is brought to you by Citizens Behind the Badge. And we're going to talk about Citizens Behind the Badge a little bit today, right? Bill looks very comfortable there, very relaxed. Craig is always chill. He's always relaxed. He's ready. And today, we just thought the three of us would reminisce a little bit. We want to go back. It's almost 5 years ago to the day that I received a phone call, Bill Erfurth received a phone call from Craig Floyd. Craig, tell us about that phone call. Tell us what the call was about, and tell us why you made the call.
I retired in 2018, right at the end of the year. We had just dedicated the National Law Enforcement Museum. We had built the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial. We became a leader in promoting officer safety and wellness. I felt like I had achieved all the goals that I'd set out, and it was time to relax, have some fun, spend more time with family. And I was doing that, enjoying it. And then all of a sudden, May 25th, 2020, something happened in this country that changed a lot of lives. And that was the death of George Floyd. And as we all know, right around that time, in the aftermath of his death, there was what was called the Defund and Defame the Police movement. All of a sudden, almost overnight, people were hating police officers. These police officers were told that they weren't doing a good job, that we should reimagine policing, we should abolish police in some areas.
Yeah.
And it was appalling to me. I mean, here's a guy that spent my whole life promoting law enforcement, talking about all the great service, the extraordinary sacrifice, put 24,000 names of fallen officers on the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial. And now people were denigrating the officers and the profession they served.
Yeah.
And it upset me. It made me angry, quite honestly. And I thought to myself, who knows more about police as a private citizen than I do? Okay. I've met thousands of them. And I wanted to do something in response to this defund the police movement. And the first two people I thought of when I said, hey, let's start an organization that would stop this defund the police movement, that would counter all the negativity and all the lies about law enforcement that we were hearing. So I called my two buddies, two of the people I'd worked with proudly over many years. We did a radio show together called CopNet. I knew both of you felt the way I did, and I thought we might be able to do some good together. So I called Bill Erfurth, I called Dennis Collins, and I said, how about the three of us start a new organization, pro-law enforcement, to stop the defund the police movement, and we're going to call this thing Citizens Behind the Badge. We wanted to mobilize millions of citizens in support of law enforcement, and we wanted to become the leading voice of law enforcement, of the citizenry in support of law enforcement. And I think over these last 5 years, gentlemen, we've done a pretty good job of meeting our goals, certainly many of them, and doing a lot of good, I think, for the law enforcement profession. So I'd love to hear your thoughts. These 5 years have gone fast. We've done a lot of work, but tell me what you all think about it.
Well, here we are 5 years later. It's kind of shocking that it's been 5 years because it's flown by like nobody's business. But I will say we can definitely take credit for changing that narrative that you mentioned about the defund and defame the police movement. There are some exceptions to that rule going on right now. I mean, we can look at this guy that's running for mayor of New York who wants to abolish the police. He's saying he wants to abolish the police. And the NYPD cops are bailing out of there left, right, and sideways. And you know what? They're coming down to Florida. And Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, has been recruiting cops from across the United States paying them $5,000 bonuses to come, moving expenses, and the whole 9 yards. And you know what? Florida's a safe place to be. It's all about law and order. And that's one of the things we can talk about. We definitely have to talk about some of the legislative achievements that Citizens Behind the Badge has accomplished. And Craig, you've done a yeoman's job. You have been all over this, and really good stuff.
Well, he continued the wonderful work that he did with the Law Enforcement Memorial and the museum. And now we have actually helped to make a dent in this narrative. And, you know, if you remember 2020, do you remember how many cities actually did defund the police? I mean, Minneapolis for sure. I think New York was one. Who else? There were numerous others.
Los Angeles. You could go down the list. Literally, Dennis, hundreds of millions of dollars. We've documented this. Hundreds of millions of dollars was defunded from law enforcement agencies across this country. New York probably led the field, but Los Angeles wasn't too far behind. And as you point out, Minneapolis is where it all started with the death of George Floyd. They, ironically, I love this, right? The hypocrisy. They cut $8 million out of their police budget within months of George Floyd's death. And then 2 years later, they restored all of that funding because of their dwindling police force. So many officers had left, so much crime had occurred that the public just couldn't take it anymore. And they finally said, okay, we give up. We're going to give more money to law enforcement and try to fix the mess we created.
And do you remember the wackadoo that was on the city council there for Minneapolis? And she was all about it. She was always outspoken about defund the police. We should have social workers respond to homes for these calls and domestics and all this other crazy nonsense. And then what happened? Lo and behold, some scumbag broke into her home. I don't remember the circumstances exactly, but I think was breaking into her house or assaulted her. And what did she have to do? She had to call the police. How about that?
They came.
Hey, she was lucky they were there, right?
I don't know. You know, who knows what the response time is, but because do you remember, like, here's a good example. So Austin, Texas, and I remember even today, Austin, Texas has turned into a massive crime problem there. And, you know, the DPS, the state troopers had to go in and may still be there and are helping to police the streets of Austin because their police department, I think, is still 1/3 understaffed. But the crime that they have had in Austin has been completely off the hook because of that. And, you know, we're still seeing that in some places around the country. I mean, the states that support their law enforcement, conservative states, conservative cities, I think that those places have rebounded and recovered. But some other places that are liberal bastions of lunacy are still reeling from it.
I like liberal bastions of lunacy. Did you coin that phrase? Is that a Bill?
I did. I have that on my wall as my mantra.
We do know that staffing is still well below the pre-2020 levels. That is something that is a fact.
About 10%.
Yeah. And, you know, we've talked amongst ourselves and Citizens Behind the Badge. What can we do to help that? I think the most important thing we can do is what we've done. And that is get hundreds of thousands of Americans to support this movement. And I want to talk today, Craig, about some of the things that you and we as a group have done to help defeat this, because there are some really important things. You know, we asked for contributions, we asked for declarations of support, and we've gotten a lot of both. I think our fans are the people that have contributed, the wonderful people who support this cause. They need to know a little bit about what we've done to support them and the people of law enforcement.
Yeah. And I bulleted out a few of those. recently, just to kind of remind myself all the things we've done to help law enforcement and to stop this defund the police movement. Let's start with, officers, as you point out, leaving the profession in droves because they felt unwanted, unappreciated. They were literally putting their lives on the line for the public safety. And yet politicians were berating them, crucifying them if they did anything that looked perhaps like they used excessive force. They'd be up on charges. Some of these officers were literally charged with crimes for simply doing their job. So what we said is, let's send a message to the law enforcement officers of this country, some 800,000 plus, and let them know that they are appreciated, that the vast majority of Americans support them, respect them, and appreciate everything they do. So we sent literally millions of letters to Americans around this country. That's the only way you can reach that many people. And we got an amazing response. Literally hundreds of thousands of these Americans have sent back declarations of support, oaths of support, letters of support, and thank yous to police officers. And what did we do? We sent those messages of support and appreciation to some 12,000 law enforcement agencies across this country. So their officers would know that the citizens they serve have their backs. Forget all the noise from the minority, if you will, the few Americans who make a lot of noise against law enforcement. And we tried to mute their message and give them a big thank you. So that's one of the big things that I think helped to, now we're seeing an uptick in retention and recruitment of officers. And the other thing that I'm very proud of is we went to Congress and state legislatures, and we gave them resolutions of support for law enforcement, because the biggest problem for law enforcement, I think, over the last several years has been the lack of support voiced by politicians, by the local leadership, right, and federal leadership. So we went to the United States Senate, for example. We worked with J.D. Vance for a couple of years. Then he became vice president. This year, we were able to get a resolution approved by the United States Senate, introduced by Senator Bill Cassidy from Louisiana, that expressed support for law enforcement in this country like you've never heard before. We had all these resolution clauses that said law enforcement is sacrificing their lives for our safety. Law enforcement is doing an amazing job. There's some 24,000 names on the National Memorial. And by the way, the United States Senate fully supports and appreciates the men and women in law enforcement, and they called for full funding and give them the resources they need to do their job so that America can be safe. And I couldn't be prouder of that, in addition to lobbying for all kinds of other legislation at the federal and state level to enact tougher penalties against criminals and to better protect the men and women who are out there risking their lives for our safety.
So when you step up to support citizens behind the badge, you're making a pretty wise investment, aren't you? An investment in signing a document to support police and making your donation so that we can carry on the work as you just told us about. Because, this
one
takes
of the biggest things. One of the biggest things I think we've accomplished is we launched a national public education campaign that was directed to the American people, but also to the legislators in this country, reminding them of all the troubling consequences of the defund and defame the police movement, all the lives that have been lost unnecessarily, all the officers who left the profession in droves. We talked about the defunding, hundreds of millions of dollars that have gone elsewhere. And public safety suffered terribly. Okay, we saw a major rise in crime. The first year of defund the police movement, we saw nearly a 30% increase in homicides in this country. All right, there's no coincidence there. Fewer police, slower response times, fewer homicides and violent crime cases being closed and cleared by police because there's so fewer officers who are out there doing their job. All of this was a very important part of our effort to turn the pendulum so it started swinging in the other, more positive direction. Because without that education, without that information about the troubling consequences, I don't think people would have reacted nearly as positively and as strongly as they did, and especially our legislators in this country. And we saw it in the last election. Pro-law enforcement legislators elected, anti-police, soft on crime district attorneys replaced. And I think we're seeing the results of that election. We're now seeing the pendulum swinging in the right direction.
Well, and don't you remember we were reading about response times? I remember reading like New Orleans. The response time to an emergency call sometimes in New Orleans was an hour. Response times in some other cities, I'll go back to Austin, Texas again, it was 25 minutes or some crazy thing like that. You know, as it should be, it's always been one cop per 1,000 people, give or take, the communities, and the response time would be within several minutes on an emergency call. You know, the problem that was happening was there were so few cops. It was such a brain drain too, also, right? It was a brain suck of all of the knowledge, experience, and backgrounds that so many detectives, special operators, cops, everybody that was working, and that was all gone because those people left. And just the response time to get to places and whatnot has been ridiculous. But I'll tell you what's going on right now. We've really come a long way since the defund thing started. And we've come a long way as an organization in these 5 years because we had to prove ourselves. First of all, it's not that easy to prove yourself with other cops because, cops are kind of questioning and jaded and whatnot. And then just your average citizen. And, for the first few years, there were a lot of people, well, what is this organization? Are they legit? Who are they? Whatever. There's been great strides made in that particular area, especially with you, Craig, and your outreach to all you've been able to now get databases of every law enforcement agency, every chief, every congressman, every senator. You're in touch with all of those people. But, ATA that we work with, they've sent out millions and millions of mailers and flyers over these 5 years. And I think people are starting to really get to know us, what everybody's backgrounds are. And, we've done all those things now, and now we're doing this podcast. I guess we're about, 6 months into doing this podcast, right?
Yep. And we actually have two podcasts. Craig,
right.
Tell us about not only this one, but the other one.
Heroes Live Forever is a podcast I started over a year ago now. I think it was May of last year. And basically, for 34 years at the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund, I honored the sacrifice of more than 24,000 officers who've died in the line of duty. And one of my favorite parts of that job was telling their story, not just how they died, but how they lived. All right, let's get to know some of these men and women so that the American people can appreciate their sacrifice a little bit more, perhaps. And I told those stories in speeches and articles and anywhere I went. And so I said, you know what? I'd like to continue doing that. I mean, that was a passion of mine, to honor these fallen law enforcement heroes. And so every week on Tuesday morning, 9 a.m., you will receive, if you're a supporter of Citizens Behind the Badge, you'll receive a podcast in your email that tells the story of a fallen American law enforcement hero. And I just love telling those stories. Yesterday, for example, I put one out. I was talking about the Haymarket riot in Chicago. 8 law enforcement officers were killed when a bomb was thrown by an anarchist at a pro-labor rally. And they targeted police. There were officers there in droves trying to help keep the peace. And this anarchist threw the bomb. 8 officers died. It was the third deadliest incident in law enforcement history back in 1886. So, I mean, how many people are talking about incidents that happened in the 1800s where 8 law enforcement officers died? We are. All right. And we're going to remember and honor those fallen heroes just as we honor the heroes who we lost this year and last year and more recently. So that's a very important part of the job. And then obviously heroes behind the badge. I love this podcast because we get to bring on the true heroes of law enforcement and introduce them to the public. Let them get to know who our law enforcement officers are, what they're willing to do, the heroism, the courage, the compassion that officers in this country have. And I think all of that is really helping to generate more support, more understanding, more appreciation for the men and women in law enforcement.
Yeah,
Craig, talk about let's tell everybody Substack and the places where they can find this, though.
Yeah, Substack is a great way to communicate. I know it's new to a lot of people. I've learned how to use it through my son, who was using it for his organization. And the bottom line is Substack, it offers anyone the opportunity to communicate with a large number of people. Right. So basically, we do op-eds, we do press releases, we do newsletters, and we do our podcasts on Substack. And we send that out to our thousands of supporters, people that have said, hey, I want to hear more about what you're doing. I want to be more involved. And I want to hear these great stories about American law enforcement. So you can sign up on Substack. You go to their website, substack.com, and basically you look for Citizens Behind the Badge. And when you do a search, you'll come to our Substack page, and all you have to do is subscribe. Click a button that says, I want to be a subscriber, and you'll be added to our list, and you'll get everything that we send out. Usually I try not to overdo it. We're talking about maybe 1 or 2 emails a week you might receive from us, including the Behind the Badge, Heroes Behind the Badge podcast, the Heroes Live Forever podcast, and any other communication pieces that we put out each week in support of law enforcement. So I'd encourage people to go there, and they can always go to our website. That's Behind Badge or citizensbehindthebadge.org. And they can sign up for our Facebook. They can be a follower on Facebook, a follower on LinkedIn, Twitter, or X now, and Substack, and YouTube. We always put our podcasts on YouTube, and we're getting a lot of viewers going to our podcast using our YouTube website.
As well as LinkedIn, as we've got LinkedIn as well. So go ahead, Dee.
No, I wanted to pause for a moment. And if you're new to this podcast, I invite you to go and look at the archives. Okay. The guests that we have had. Wow. What a lineup of true heroes. We've been, Craig, if Craig doesn't know this person in law enforcement with his background at the museum and at the law enforcement memorial, if Erfurth doesn't know him with his 26 years of service in Miami-Dade, retired as a lieutenant, I mean, if these two guys don't know him, they're probably not knowable. And so we've been able to attract an amazing list of guests, and they tell their stories right here for you to hear. And some of the stories you may already know, and some may be new, but here's the difference. It's in their words. It's their words. It's not written somewhere. It's not some reporter interviewing them. They're talking in there. We let them talk, and they talk, and they tell what they're really thinking. I highly encourage you to go back and look at the archives. I also want to remind you that this podcast, Heroes Behind the Badge, is sponsored by Citizens Behind the Badge. That is another outreach that we do to reach out and get the message, the right narrative about law enforcement out to the American people. And that's the whole purpose of this. We tell real stories about real cops. We expose the fake news about the police, and we bring you the real truth. That's the commitment that we have. So remember, citizensbehindthebadge.org. I call it ORG. I guess it's org.
Yeah, either way, right? Hey, can we talk about some current event stuff right now? I want to throw this around.
No, we don't want to talk about that.
I think that this is pretty important. And we talk about this,
We're going
Dennis.
to talk about it anyway. Billy's
Dennis, you say this in your openings all the time about we give you the real truth, not the BS that the media, the fake media is throwing out there. And so let's talk about ICE right now. Let's talk about what's going on with them. We talked earlier about, the defund, the defame the police thing is kind of coming back and it's getting better every year. But, I just watched something the other day. It was 700% increase in assaults and attacks on ICE agents, right? And this is being organized. I think it's really important for people to understand this isn't just some organic, freak show of blue-haired, nose ringed nutbags that are running around doing this shit.
Just offended half the population. Go ahead.
Well, hey, that's not our population, right? Those people are being supported behind the scenes. I mean, there was an arrest made in LA where this guy was actually distributing masks. He had a carload of masks, and other guys riding around with a carload of bricks and passing them out. And they're being funded, right? I mean, they're all showing up, same time, same place. You do realize you don't see these people protesting at 8 in the morning or 9 in the morning because they've they smoke so much meth and cocaine that they can't get functioning that freaking early in the day.
We've really
but anyway,
these people, haven't we?
Yeah. So besides those scumbags, how about the thing in California at the marijuana farm? This is something that really pissed me off that I want to talk about. And it'll be funny, Dennis, because when I tell this story, and Dennis, you used to ride with me multiple times when I was running the tactical narcotics team.
I did.
Now, and tactical narcotics team, we'd make 35, 50 arrests, and we didn't put up with anybody's bullshit. But anyway, you can chime in and see how you think we would have reacted.
Oh,
so
I already know. Yeah.
They're at this marijuana farm. Okay. They arrest 300 illegals. I think it was 9 or 10 children, underage children. All kinds of craziness went on. And I think one of the points that everybody really needs to know is, everybody's screaming, oh, they're migrant workers or this and that or whatever they may be. Okay. It's still illegal to come into this country. But more importantly, I think digging deeper and digging down, people need to know this. Those people that are in this country illegally, whether they're working on that marijuana farm, which in fact was the case, or other places, those people are supporting the cartels. Those people are all sending money back to the Mexican cartels, and it's an underground organized crime ring. And that's going on, whether you believe it or not. That's happening with all of these people because every one of them that crossed the border had to either pay or are continuing to pay the cartels that smuggled them. So those people are directly and indirectly affecting crime and the cartels. So that's a good point I wanted to say. Here's the other thing.
I've never heard that. That's a theory I've never heard.
Well, it's been discussed, and I've seen it and read it in a number of forums, and it's a problem. So that's one way to.
Does Tom Homan agree with that?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, Tom Homan was discussing that just the other day. Okay. And Tom Homan was discussing this is about what I'm going to say. And even Trump jumped in and said, the ICE agents got to get out and do what they got to do to take care of business. They have his full 100% support to take action against lawlessness and crime. So those people, those ICE guys are leaving the farm, and those sons of bitches are out there throwing boulders and rocks and bricks at their vehicles and exploding their windows. And the one guy was running right alongside one of the vans. And, they had tried to put a human roadblock and some bicycles there to slow them down and ambush them essentially with these rocks and bricks. And the one guy ran right along the side of that van and threw a massive rock right into the passenger window. Now, in Florida, at least, it's called hurling a deadly missile into a moving vehicle, which is a felony. And people are killed easily by people doing that, like stupid people throwing those things off of bridges on highways or just throwing rocks. Can you imagine that? Here's my thought. And I know some people are going to be, oh my God, this is so over the top. But I'll tell you what, if I was driving that frickin' van and somebody just threw a big boulder into my passenger window, I'd have jumped out and shot him right in the face.
Wow.
And then the next ones that are throwing the rocks and the bricks at the outcoming vans, they should have jumped out with a shotgun and blown their shit up. You know what? And that would have been the end of it. Because, quite frankly, you would be justified, because that is lethal force being used against those ICE agents. And in return, a law enforcement agent can use lethal force in defense of themselves. Had they done that, of course, the liberal lunacy media would have lost their minds. But I'll tell you what, it would have ultimately been justified. And what message would that have sent? What message would that have sent? Do you think that would have probably put an end to that? Because the scum of the earth would see that, and that would be like, I don't want that to happen.
I'm not so sure that they care about consequences. I can't speak for those people. I don't think like those people, but I'm going to guess they expect trouble and they know they're going to get confronted, and perhaps some of them could be arrested and killed.
Well, but they've been empowered. They've been empowered because there hasn't been a lot of action taken. If they were getting their asses whooped left, right, and sideways.
I've seen a lot of arrests. I have not been at any rally, but just watching TV, I've seen ICE and local authorities make a lot of arrests. I don't know how many, but more than one.
Well, when there's lethal force being used, that's it. That's the.
But all right, let me ask you a question. Let's say that you were in charge and you did what you just said. What do you think the consequences of that would be?
Well, first of all, I'm not even sure that it would have gotten that far, because if I was leading the charge, I'd have been shooting tear gas like rain.
They were. If you notice those films, there's tear gas canisters all over the floor, all over the ground.
Yeah, and there were, like, out in the farm. But you know what? You got to have your recon people. You've got to be ready. If you've got an exit strategy and you're leaving there with people in custody and you know that those guys are going to be assaulting you, you got to have your forward advance team and do the little bit of a recon, and you got to get out. So those guys that were throwing rocks, you should have had a van load of guys. And like I said, either you get out and they're throwing those rocks, you shoot them, or you just get out and you whoop their fucking ass.
A couple key points here. One, Bill, you've hit on something that I've always been amazed at, quite honestly, and that is that police in those potentially deadly situations show amazing restraint.
Absolutely.
Right? These ICE agents certainly would have been justified to use force against the people that were throwing rocks through their windows of their vehicles. I saw it on TV as well, and I was outraged. And I was amazed that the ICE agents didn't jump out and, as you said, use some kind of force, maybe lethal force, because they were trying to harm them. There's no question about it. But the other thing that I think this hits on, and we saw it for 5 years during the defund and defame the police movement, and that is the liberal voices who were more or less allowing and encouraging non-compliance with law enforcement to somehow suggest that it's okay to throw rocks at ICE agents because somehow the illegal aliens shouldn't be arrested and sent back home from where they came. And these liberal voices are encouraging that type of violence against police, against law and order, protest, and disrespect for the laws of this land. And it's outrageous to me that
they're complicit. They're complicit.
Legislators, political leaders, people that supposedly have some responsibility for the welfare of our nation, are somehow encouraging this level of violence and these attacks on law enforcement and disrespecting the laws of America. And this has been the problem for the last 5 years. It's getting better. But as you're pointing out very clearly, we have a long way to go because there's still a lot of nut voices out there that are somehow allowing for this and seemingly saying it's okay to attack police officers.
Yeah, and you know what? And those people are totally complicit. The media is complicit in all this, and they've encouraged this, as have many of the politicians and some of the things they've said. But let's say this. I mean, unless you're some meth head zombie, most people have at least half a brain cell or some common sense to know that if you throw something at a cop or you assault a cop or you resist, something's going to happen there. When I went through the police academy and, back in the day, back in the day, but when we were in the police academy, they literally taught us if somebody puts their hands on you, the rule is they go to the hospital. And, the thing of it is, and it used to be like, there's this matrix, use of force matrix kind of thing, right? And there was also this understanding that, if you were a cop and you let some scumbag come up and verbally abuse you and you tolerated that, okay, you've just empowered that person. So the next cop that they encounter, now they go and they spit on that cop. Well, if somebody spits on you, they should get their teeth knocked out. And if you've just empowered that person that spit on you and you didn't do anything, then now that same guy is empowered again. And now they go to the next cop. So now what are they going to do this time? Well, now they think, oh, well, I've been able to verbally abuse. I've been able to spit on him. I'm going to punch this guy in the face this time, right? Each time, because these people are being empowered. It's the same with these scrotes that are running around, at that farm and the ice and whatever. They just got to throw those rocks. Hopefully those guys are being hunted down. My only thought is the reason that ICE agents didn't jump out of the van at the time was because they didn't have sufficient personnel in those vans to get out.
They had prisoners in those vans.
And they had the prisoners that they had to secure. Right. Yeah. So, and they probably only had one or two guys, and then in the back of that van is the jail. So anyway, my point is, not only is it seeming like policing is coming back around, but it's the empowerment now. And thank God that Trump got on and said, I give 100% full support and authorization to take whatever action is necessary. And that's what you need. You need this.
Wouldn't you believe, though? Don't you believe? I think anybody who knows you knows your views, and they're very strong views, and you're saying them like it is right here, right now. But wouldn't you also agree that policing has changed?
Wow, clearly,
dramatically.
Clearly,
somebody curses at you or something, or if they spit at you. Nowadays, that's not policing. You may say it should be, but it isn't. That's not policing in the modern day.
And unfortunately, that's because of politics, politicians, and liberal lunacy. Because I still think the vocal minority is I'm sorry, how do we say this? It's the vocal minority that are out there that we're hearing from. The silent majority are the people that support the police. You just don't hear from them as much. But I just the people I was even with this weekend, some people that are ranchers and farmers. Everybody wants the police to go out there and take care of business.
Of course. But taking care of business has been redefined. You would agree with that.
Well, and it has
happened back in the 80s and the 90s isn't going to happen today. And maybe that's a good thing. Maybe that's a good thing.
Maybe it's a good thing. I mean, you can argue about that, about raising your kids. Remember, it was like, okay, you got the belt or you got spanked or whatever. And then all of a sudden we went through this time period of, oh, well, that's child abuse and it's this and that and the other. But you know what? There has to be a little bit of corporal punishment and there has to be a little bit of fear. We talked about this all the time. The people that are criminals, the scum of the earth, the scumbags, they don't have any respect. There is zero respect for law enforcement. You know what they respect? Violence. And it's the respect of fear. And fear is the only thing that they care about or that they're going to respect, because if they think that they're going to get a beating, if they think they're going to get shot, that's the only thing that's drawn the line between the lawful and the lawless.
That's a pretty interesting
shift-
line that you
I
just.
want to shift gears just for a moment. It's somewhat related, but recently the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund announced the mid-year fatality report. How many officers died in the line of duty during the first half of this year? And the news was rather positive. All right. 42 officers died in the line of duty. That was the bad news. The good news is that was 53% less than the same time last year. And it was one of the lowest mid-year fatality figures we've seen in decades.
Yes.
All right. Now, let's talk about the reasons for that. All right. Obviously, better training, better equipment. We're now putting more money back to help protect and allow our officers to do their job safely and effectively. But Bill Alexander, who's now the CEO at the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund, my successor, he had an interesting spin on those numbers. I saw him in a recent interview, and he's saying that there has been a shift in the culture here in America, which we've talked about, which I think we helped generate. All right. And that is that now there is more respect for law and order. To your point, Bill, whether it's because we are getting tougher on criminals, there's definitely tougher laws now in place. We saw California voters, one of the most liberal states in America, vote for tougher penalties for those that commit drug or theft crimes in the last election. People are tired, sick and tired of being criminal victims or being preyed upon by the criminal element. And now the shift in attitude has maybe discouraged some of these lawless figures that you're referring to from disobeying the laws because they know there's going to be penalties. There's more respect for law and order and for the police officers out there serving. And as a result, there's more compliance. All right. Because you know better than I that every time you do a traffic stop or a pedestrian stop, there's always a chance for this unforeseen, volatile, potentially violent moment to occur. But if citizens that are stopped by police for whatever reason are compliant and basically obey whatever instructions they're being given by the officer, there's less likelihood of anyone getting hurt or killed. And as a result, we're seeing fewer officer fatalities. I hope that trend continues. And I think it helps to reinforce your point, which is if there is a fear of consequences when you commit a crime in this country, then I think there's going to be fewer people that are willing to commit crimes, and hopefully they will be deterred.
Yeah, let's quote exactly what Alexander said, Bill Alexander. He said, I believe his quote or something like this, pro-police culture is making it safer for officers, right? The message is clear. If you step out of line, there will be penalties, and persons stopped by police are there will be penalties, sorry, and persons stopped by the police are becoming more compliant, preventing potentially volatile encounters from occurring less frequently. I think the ICE thing that Billy brought up, it's real and it's wrong. There's no question. Okay. But let's also remember this. The media is taking those little slices of things that happen and blowing it up as if the whole world is attacking police. When it was one incident in one place, I know it's been several places, but let's not overreact to that. Okay. I think the bigger message is that the culture is becoming safer. Unfortunately, the ICE thing is a very emotional issue for people.
The ICE thing is maybe a bit of an outlier. It doesn't affect law enforcement across the board, but you still can't say it's just a couple of incidents because a 700% increase in assaults on federal law enforcement is pretty significant. But let's just dig deeper into this. So, Craig, you mentioned about, okay, there's more respect and all those kind of things. I think there's, you got to look at 10% of the population roughly commits 90% of the crime. It's the recidivist and the recidivist crime, right? Those people need to be hammered and put in jail and put in prison. I mean, the no bond, these repeat offenders. You hear these stories time after time about, people that have killed other people, rape, robbery, whatever, and they're still out on the streets and they get their shots. One other thing that plays into all of this, and maybe that we're getting more respect in law enforcement, or people are more compliant, as you say, Craig, is there are cameras everywhere now. And the cops are wearing the body cams, the dashboard cameras. You can't walk down a street in a town or a city and you're not on a camera. I think not only has that helped the police significantly solve crimes and arrest people because of the cameras, but it's also made people a little bit more compliant and aware. And the funny thing about this is, when the cops first started to wear the body cams, all the liberal groups in the ACLU, they were all saying this is going to be great because now we're going to be able to catch all of these cops doing all the wrong things and unlawfully brutalizing people and all this other crap. And you know what? It didn't show that. It showed just the opposite. It showed how abusive, obnoxious, and outrageous that the people were to law enforcement. And it completely flipped the script on them to the point that now they started advocating to get rid of the frickin' body cams. I mean, what kind of hypocrisy there? But you know what? They work now, and it's become a fabric of law enforcement, and it's made a big difference.
Okay.
I think, too, one of the things I'm proudest of with CBB is that we have countered the media lies and the myths, the false narrative, if you will, that's been put out there about law enforcement. And I think that's one of the reasons why we're seeing more respect for the men and women serving today, because all those accusations of police being brutal racists, we've totally debunked with the data that's so clear that just the opposite, that of the 62 million interactions between police and the public every year in this country, a force of any kind is used less than 2% of the time. It hardly ever happens. All right. To Dennis's point, de-escalation. Police aren't out there using force with any regularity. It seldom happens, and when it does, it's because a person that they've stopped is not being compliant. Okay. The other issue of race, the defund the police movement and Black Lives Matter was predicated on the idea that police are somehow racist. Systemic racism was the charge by a lot of the liberals in policing. And the fact is that there is no evidence whatsoever that police are racist. In fact, when you look at all the data, it shows that of all the people that are stopped every year by police-initiated contacts with the public, they call it, whether it's a traffic stop, a pedestrian stop, that 10% of whites, 10% of blacks, 10% of the Hispanic population are stopped. All right. There is no statistical difference between the races or ethnicity. Police are blind when it comes to, whether the person I'm stopping is black, white, or Hispanic. It doesn't matter. And all the studies have proven that out. And I think now that we've hit on that point over and over again over these last 5 years, it's made a difference. Now people are willing more often to give police the benefit of the doubt, in part because of what you said, that we're seeing how they conduct themselves. Of the 62 million people that had an interaction with law enforcement, they were surveyed by the Department of Justice, and it was determined that 99% of the people that interacted with police said the interaction was conducted properly. There was no misconduct at all involved. And I think that says it all. 99% of the time, police are conducting themselves professionally and honorably. They're doing an amazing job. And we've finally been able to convince the legislators, the public, even some of the liberal naysayers that police are doing a pretty darn good job for this country. And that's why crime is starting to go down again, because we're giving them the respect and the resources they need to keep America safe.
You'll never see that stat in the media. The stat,
Ah,
Never.
all you
That's
see,
why we had to put it out there.
yeah, and
Yeah.
that all you see is where the cops screwed up. And yeah, there are some bad cops, guys. Sorry to say it, there are, and they should be punished, and they should be taken out, and they don't need to be policemen anymore. Okay?
But you know that's oftentimes, and nobody really understands this. That's policed from within. I was surprised myself when I was working, and I was told by a friend of mine that was working in internal affairs, 60% of the complaints that they got per year in internal affairs, or whether it was just that year, I'm not sure, but 60% of the complaints received came from within. Because, you know, if I'm wearing that badge, I don't want that badge to be tarnished or discredited by somebody that's, you know, a criminal. You know, those people are washed out of those out of the ranks. And
hopefully they
whatnot. And it's pretty well policed. It's much more policed than the general public realizes it is. And I want to go back to something that Craig just said about the statistics and stuff like that, and go back to the media, because this was another misnomer and it was basically just a lie. So they did these studies, you know, during the Obama administration. I remember that everyone had to fill out a form every time that you did a traffic stop, whether you gave a ticket, whether it was a verbal warning, whether it was whatever it was, you had to fill out a form. And it was basically a racial profiling form. I don't know how long it lasted. It didn't last more than maybe a year or something like that. It was just another bunch of red tape, time-consuming forms that you had to fill out. And it was all about ethnicity and race and all this kind of stuff like that. And, you know, the media and everybody else tried to skew those numbers, because let's face it, think about this. If you're a cop in Memphis, if you're a cop in Detroit, if you're a cop in any inner city area, right? And it says, oh, well, 90% of the traffic stops that were made were stops against black people. Well, don't 90% of the people that live in that area, aren't those 90% black? You know, so, you know, same in Miami, okay? Miami, I think Miami proper is something like 65 or 60% Hispanic. So isn't it going to make sense that probably the vast majority of the people that you're going to stop within Miami are going to be Hispanic? So they never used that to say, okay, well, what are the demographics here? So how, you know, if you're in lily white neighborhoods, who are you stopping? You're stopping white people. So, you know, there was so many things that were misconstrued and misunderstood there, I think.
Well, guys, as always, we could talk on and on about this. There's no end to some of these topics, but there is an end.
And this is our police.
There is an end to this podcast. And we have come to that point where we must end. But guess what? We have unearthed a bunch of topics, haven't we? We've unearthed a bunch of topics, particularly one that I'm fond of getting into is the media narratives about police. And we've talked about that at Citizens Behind the Badge. What can we do to be a watchdog? And that's part of the job that we do. We look for the inequities, we look for the fake news, and we expose the fake news. So that's one of the things you can help us with by joining us, citizensbehindthebadge.org, citizensbehindthebadge.org. Okay? On there, you can find all about Bill Erfurth and his interesting career. It's all there. All about Craig Floyd and how he has been an advocate for law enforcement for many, many years. And you can subscribe, you can like and follow our podcast, because when you do that, you get notified when the new episodes come out. You're the first to know. Okay. So make sure you follow, like, subscribe. We'd love to have you as part of the family. And there's a donate button. You now know a little bit more about what Citizens Behind the Badge does with the money that's donated by the generous American people. Okay? Help us continue this mission. It's starting to work. We've been a part of it, but there's more to do. We got to keep the watch. We got to keep the watch. As Craig says, we're one election away from possibly going in the wrong direction. We've got to be vigilant, and we will be vigilant. So I'm going to say, on behalf of Bill Erfurth and Craig Floyd, I am Dennis Collins. I'm going to say thank you for listening. This was a little different show. Maybe we should do this again. What do you think? Give us some comments. Maybe not. I don't know. What do you all think? Give us some comments, and we'll listen to your comments. But this has been Heroes Behind the Badge. We tell real stories about real cops. We expose the fake news about the police, and we bring you the real truth. See you soon.